We're definitely at a turning point in terms of, in maybe the next decade, maybe next 2 decades, we really have to take drastic measures in order to turn this boat around.
If you've ever been diving or even seen underwater videos, you may know that a healthy coral reef is a noisy place. The sounds of crackling shrimp, the popping, whoops, and grunts of fish and other organisms. It's noisy, diverse, sometimes even overwhelming. But on a bleached reef, it's silence. An eerie, complete silence. And with the noise, the diverse colors that characterize reefs are also gone, replaced by rows of corals that have turned completely white. Welcome to Ibis Insights, a deep dive into research at the University of Miami having a transformational impact on our communities and well beyond. We take you to the labs, the classrooms, and the field to meet the faculty, students, and alumni working to find solutions to the biggest challenges facing our world today. I'm Tony Segreto, and today, on our very first episode of Ibis Insights, we'll learn about coral reefs, the threats they face, and what that means for you and the future of our planet. We'll speak to researchers at the Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science whose passion for reefs and the environment have led them to devote their entire lives to conservation and restoration, and who are working against time to save our reefs from extinction. Because as you'll hear, there's a lot at stake for all of us, whether you know it or not.
Something that we take for granted is that corals are actually an animal. They're very closely related to the jellyfish. They're in the phylum Cnidaria. If you look closely at their little polyps, they look like an upside down jellyfish with their tentacles in the air. And they secrete this calcium carbonate. And so that's how they kind of look like these rocks, these kind of like what we call like snotty rocks. They are indeed an animal. They're not a plant or an algae. And they are able to grow in these really poor nutrient waters of the Caribbean because they have developed this symbiosis with these unicellular algae.
We're at the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science on Virginia Key, near downtown Miami. In the Coral Reef Futures Wet Lab, rows of tanks are filled with pieces of what appear to be small rocks, but are in fact corals. This is where Ph.D. student Kelsey Johnson-Sapp, who you just heard from, and her colleagues spend a lot of time analyzing and learning about corals, seeing how they react to different water temperatures, replicating that same water change happening in our very oceans. The Rosenstiel School may be the perfect place to study corals, with Florida's Coral Reef Tract, after all, which stretches 350 miles just a few steps away. Here are a few facts. Florida's Reef Tract is the third largest coral barrier reef system in the world, and the only coral reef system in the continental United States. It is home to 40 species of reef-building corals and over 6,000 other aquatic species.
This is the Coral Reef Futures Wet Lab under Dr. Andrew Baker, and this is where we run all of what we call our ex situ or outside of the water experiments. So this is where we're able to control all of the different variables like temperature and lights in a lab setting.
The work that Kelsey is doing is part of a much larger, urgent effort by the University of Miami and various partners across the state to save coral reefs in Florida and to conduct research and find solutions that can be applied across the globe where corals are facing similar threats of extinction. It includes restoration and research, education and outreach. Because what's at stake are a number of ecological, economic, and societal goods. We're talking about billions of dollars in food, jobs, recreational opportunities, coastal protection, and other important benefits that stem from coral reef ecosystems. Much of the magic, allure, and prosperity of South Florida derives from the reefs just off of our shores.
It doesn't matter whether you are a fisherman, a diver, a snorkeler, you run a hotel, or you enjoy the beach, or you go to the supermarket. The benefits of healthy coral reefs are there for everybody to see and enjoy.
That's Diego Lirman, University of Miami Associate Professor and founder of the Benthic Ecology and Coral Restoration Lab, as well as the Rescue a Reef Citizen Science Program at the university. Dr. Lirman has spent the better part of the last 20 years learning about corals and what causes them to die off. He's now become a leader in coral and reef restoration in Florida and the United States.
Coral reefs are essential to the economy of South Florida. We have a tourism-based economy. We have the most vulnerable and valuable shoreline probably in the whole U.S. here in South Florida.
Healthy coral reefs provide the first line of defense against what could be the most devastating part of any hurricane, storm surge. As Dr. Lirman and his Rosenstiel School colleagues have demonstrated, in shallow waters, coral reefs can actually mitigate more than 90% of the energy of oncoming waves.
By protecting our reefs, by restoring our reefs, we are protecting our economic resources. We are protecting our tourism-based industry. People come to Florida to fish, to dive, to snorkel, to go to the beach. And the health of coral reefs is tied very closely to those ecosystem services. So it is very, very important to us in Florida and to the world. Even if you are never able to see a coral reef in person, dive on it, fish on it, go to the supermarket and buy your fish. And many of the sources of protein that you buy at your local food store or supermarket come from reefs or near-shore environments. So again, even if you've never seen a reef or you will never see a reef in your life, you are already benefiting from the resources that are associated with coral reefs and other coastal resources. So I don't buy that the health of coral reefs don't affect everybody. They do affect everybody because we're all connected.
About 25% of the ocean's fish depend on healthy coral reefs. Also, if you eat seafood and you like lobsters or you like crabs, it's most likely they've been harvested directly from a coral reef or the reef served as protection for the juvenile fish and shellfish before they reached maturity. Coral reefs also help protect other ecosystems like mangroves, where a lot of shrimp are harvested as well. And that's saying nothing of the possible future pharmaceutical benefits coral reefs could provide as we continue to discover more about them. Unfortunately, things are not going well for corals, with sharp declines recorded in coral health and coverage since the 1980s, and several reef-building species in the Caribbean now listed as threatened. These numbers are staggering. Worldwide, 50% of coral reefs have died in the last 30 years. Nearly 90% of the live corals in the Florida Keys have been lost.
First dive that I ever did on a coral reef here in Florida was a couple months after Hurricane Andrew hit. And I went to one of these reefs that was damaged by the storm, and I saw hundreds, if not thousands, of coral fragments that were still living, pieces of corals that had broken up, just covering the floor. Hurricane Andrew was the first in a series of major disturbances that have impacted our local reefs. Sadly, the reefs are not doing well today, and compared to what I saw 30 years ago, they've undergone major declines. So we've had hurricanes. We have the 2005 hurricanes. We've had the first back-to-back bleaching years. The sea temperatures got so warm that the symbiosis between coral host, the coral animal, and its symbiotic microalgae that provide the food that the corals need to grow breaks down because of high temperature, and the corals lose their algal symbionts, the little tiny microalgae that live within their tissues, and they're so important for their nutrition and survivorship. When that happens, the corals turn white, resulted in a loss of a lot of corals and declines in a lot of reefs. And then more recently, as if we didn't have enough to worry about, starting in 2014, we are now in the middle of probably the worst disease epidemic that our reefs have ever seen.
These declines have been driven by both local and global stressors, including hurricanes, coral bleaching, and more recently, a coral disease epidemic that has spread and affected reefs along our coast and even all the way into the Caribbean. Still, the main driver is climate change.
The key driver is temperatures, high temperatures that are driven by human-caused global climate change. There's other drivers, of course. There's acidification caused by increased CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere and in the and changes in the chemistry of the oceans. There's also sea level rise, but temperature increases. Temperature spikes are the key driver, and they are linked directly to human-driven global climate change. There's no discussion about that. We have very clear links that are science-based that demonstrate that that's what's going on.
Sounds scary and overwhelming, doesn't it? But researchers are not losing hope. The Rosenstiel School is well equipped to take on these challenges. There is the Sustain Lab, whose centerpiece is a powerful wind wave storm simulator capable of replicating Category 5 conditions. Here, researchers study the ability of coral reefs to absorb wave energy and protect our coastlines. And in Rosenstiel School labs, they examine all the other stressors that contribute to coral loss.
We have amazing facilities here at the University of Miami. We can replicate a bleaching event. We can create the environment in which corals may have a hard time calcifying because of ocean acidification. We can add nutrients. We can create scenarios in which corals are exposed to different disturbances and learn from their response. So we can rank their performance. For example, we can expose 30 different coral genotypes to high temperatures.
Then there are the coral nurseries, where they nurture new coral stocks to restore this vital coastal buffer.
The in-water nurseries are where we grow most of our corals, but we also have expanding, unique land-based facilities here in Virginia Key where we can grow thousands and thousands of little corals under very controlled conditions. We are working on different fronts. On the one hand, we are expanding our restoration footprint through what's called coral gardening, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically growing corals within in-water or land-based nurseries, in our in-situ nurseries, without having to go out and collect from the very depleted adult population. We're growing our sustainable stocks, and we're then able to plant thousands of corals onto our reefs on a yearly basis. And we are using citizen scientists. Anybody that can come out and snorkel or dive with us are able to help with restoration. So that's one aspect of what we do.
And at the University of Miami, the work that's being done is already having a positive impact on the reefs and the community. They're working with partners in the community, conducting groundbreaking research and training the next generation of leaders and experts in coral conservation and restoration.
We need to work through education because people that know about a resource, they begin to love the resource and then they protect the resource. That's the sequence. You need to learn about it, you fall in love with it, and then you protect it. We have ownership, we have stewardship of the resources. So education is key, and we are spending an increasing amount of our time and effort educating the public.
But that's not enough, according to Dr. Lirman.
Something that we realized early on is that all of the drivers, all of the factors that caused the initial mortality are still there. We haven't fixed global, climate change. We haven't fixed issues with the water quality coming from the Everglades. We haven't fixed all the key drivers. So we don't want to grow corals, plant them for them to become the next wave of climate victims. So we can't just do this. We can't just grow existing corals and plant them.
And so that's where the type of research that Kelsey, Dr. Lirman, and countless other students and faculty at the University of Miami comes in, to learn more about corals, to find out what makes them more resilient, and find ways to save them.
So this is Orbicella Fabulata. This is actually an endangered species here in the greater Atlantic. It is a vital reef building species. This is actually a heat stress tank. So these corals are currently undergoing heat stress over a certain period. Some of these corals don't really mind the heat stress. They've kept a lot of their tissue, a lot of their color, meaning that they're still full of symbionts and absolutely thriving.
We are working on state-of-the-science techniques to try to first identify, because we have surviving corals and we can learn from the survivors. What is it in their physiology, their genetics, that made them survivors? All of the corals around them died because of bleaching or disease, but the ones that we are propagating survived. So we're learning from those. We're doing assisted migration. We're moving corals from warm environments that have seen increased water temperatures into environments that have not seen the increased temperatures. So a lot of the work that we're doing now is moving corals from the Keys that are from warmer environments into places like Miami-Dade and Broward County, which have not seen the high temperatures, as a way to prime the populations within Miami-Dade County and Broward County, so that when the next heat wave comes around and hits the northernmost reefs, then those populations are primed to be able to resist the next bleaching event. So we are working at different fronts, and it's very exciting work, and hopefully we'll be able to scale it up so that we're not just planting victims of future events, that we are planting corals that will maximize their survivorship.
Over the past few years, faculty from different departments and fields of expertise were able to collaborate on large-scale projects. A team led by Dr. Lirman and Coral Reef's future lab leader, Andrew Baker, along with a University of Miami engineering professor, was recently awarded $6 million of funding to look at coastal resilience and coral resilience. And the Florida Department of Environmental Protection has recently awarded them over $1.5 million of expanded restoration activities.
We're putting teams together that have engineers, that have ocean modelers, that have communicators, that have architects. So we realize that this is, a big problem, and you need a big solution, and you need a multidisciplinary team to address these very complex issues. We're working together with the City of Miami Beach Resilience Office to develop hybrid artificial coral reefs that combine cement with living corals to be able to mitigate the impacts of storms and waves. It's, the community of people engaged in coastal protection, damage mitigation, and restoration has expanded significantly over the past, I would say, 10 years. And Florida is at the forefront of this research. As a group, we are planting tens of thousands of corals onto our Florida reefs. So at the very basic, at the very minimum, those corals would not be there if we hadn't grown them in our nurseries. I'm also convinced that we're having impacts on the ecology of the system, because we see as these restoration plots or reefs grow and develop, we're seeing fish come in and colonize these newly planted plots, we are making an impact.
So here's the question. How can we get involved?
Different ways, depending on who you are or where you are. Learn, as much as you can about the resources, because you need to gain ownership of the resources, and the best way to do that is to care. And you need to learn to be able to care. Get engaged at any capacity. Vote in such a way that you're voting for people that care about the resources and will support the research and the management of these resources. That is important. If you are able to join us physically, then we have a citizen science program. The University of Miami has the Rescue a Reef citizen science program that we established about 5 years ago. And that's an opportunity for people to come to our labs, go through our workshops, and join us in expeditions.
Contribute to science, contribute to coral restoration, and even more so, tell your friends about it. Start these really important conversations about the state of our ecosystem, the state of coral reefs and their ecosystem services that they provide for you and your communities. And I think that will inspire others. That's what I actually hope to do in my career, is just be a source of information and inspiration to catalyze people to change their behaviors and endeavor to change the behaviors of others. Global coral reef ecosystems span thousands and thousands of square kilometers, even in just Australia alone. One of the most fascinating facts about corals is that the actual animal itself is only about 2 cell layers thick, and it's just a thin veneer on top of this calcium carbonate skeleton that it deposits. This 2 cell layer animal build structures that are so large that they can actually be seen from space. There are not many things that we can see distinctly from space, but coral reef ecosystems are one of them. That to me is just a huge indicator of how wildly important these ecosystems are and why it's so important to keep them healthy. Because the reality is that coral reefs will actually be, on their current trajectory, they will actually be the first ecosystem to go extinct in the history of humanity. So we're not talking about tigers, we're not talking about pandas or single species, although those are obviously very important, but we're talking about an entire ecosystem disappearing. And so when you just really internalize that very sobering fact, I think that there will be a lot more urgency in terms of trying to allocate resources and attention and science and research, and especially technologies, to rehabilitating these reefs. I am definitely an optimist. I don't think that there would be as many people in this field, if anyone at all, if we thought that there was no opportunity to salvage our coral reefs. I think that if you are in this field, you believe that there is still a chance in order to turn the tides.
For many of you, when you started listening to this first podcast of Ibis Insights, you were probably thinking to yourself, why should I care? We hope now that you know why you should care. This impacts all of us in every way possible, and it will have impact on our children. We thank you for joining us on this first episode of Ibis Insights. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Visit our page at alumni.miami.edu/Ibis Insights. Stay tuned for our next episode this June. Until then, here's to a brighter planet.